all that being said, let's get this message started. Man, you guys have gotten really good at that. It's awesome. And so we've been having our series, we're calling our series The Leftovers. And The Leftovers is just imagine for a moment that you have a backpack that you have to carry around for your entire life. There's nothing that you can do. They're just things that you have to carry. If you have a family, then there is a weight to that you have to carry on a daily basis. If you've ever raised kids, then you know there's no days off. There's no days off from raising kids. You can't take days off. And then also, if you have been married, then you know that at least you shouldn't take any days off from your marriage. And so there's a weight there that you have to carry. But many times, as believers, we are carrying way more than what God has asked us to do or that we should be carrying. And I call that the leftovers. It's all the things that we have left in our lives. Once we go to the altar and we begin to confess to God how much we need Him, and His love comes in and interrupts our lives, and then we get up, we feel changed. And if it was anything like my experience, it was one of the most amazing moments of my life whenever I got up from the altar, knowing that I was forgiven. But at the same time, I still had a whole lot of messes that I had to sort through in my life and surrender to God. And so that's what we're talking about, is the leftovers. And since we're so close to Halloween, we're doing the Leftovers Scary Edition. I'm glad you guys found that funny and not offensive. So we're having the Leftovers Scary Edition, and it's all the things. They're at the bottom of the bag that we don't want anybody to know about, that nobody can see, that if we are clever, we can keep it hidden, and people may not know unless they really know us, and they might see it every once in a while. So we're going to talk about the things that are very personal and very like in the shadows, don't want anybody to see, and maybe we don't even necessarily know what is there, but let's make it clear. We all are. All of us. And so I'm going to read again. It's all of us. All of us are carrying around things that keep us from following Jesus the way that He intended. All of us have things that we are carrying around that weigh us down. Some of us, it's not a whole lot of weight, but it's enough to slow us down. Or some of us, it's a whole lot of weight, and we tire out, and you wonder, God, why is it that I commit myself to You, and then it seems like just within a few weeks, I am exhausted and I can no longer function in my faith the way that I did just a few weeks ago, or maybe it was a few months, or for some of us, I know it's been this for me, is maybe just a few days. You almost have to recommit yourself to your faith every day. And so you might be asking, why am I going through that on a regular basis? It just seems that I'm always being slowed down. I'm always not going at the pace that I believe that God wants me to be going in church. So often it's because we're carrying around much more than what we were ever intended to carry or supposed to be carrying. And we're going to talk about one of those today. And I want you just to think, and this is a rhetorical question, I don't want anybody shouting out anything. I don't want anybody shouting out the name of a president or former president. But what is something that you hate most in the world? Just think about that for a second. What is something that you, just like every time you hear about it or see it, man, you're just like, man, I hate that. That is something I can't stand. It might be something simple, like cruising in the left lane, and people that just kind of go the speed limit in the left lane. That is a sin. It is against the Lord. Or maybe it is something that is a little bit more deep. Maybe it's the thought of sex trafficking in this world, and maybe it's the thought that America is one of the biggest consumers of that in this world. And maybe it's the thought of drugs. Maybe addiction has just destroyed what you love and what you know, or someone that you love and know has been destroyed by addiction. But I want you guys to just think for a minute, just like, what is that one thing? What is that one thing that you're like, man, if I could just get rid of one thing in the world, it would be this? Did you guys know that God gave us a list of behaviors that He hated as well? That God has a list Himself, just like we could sit down and we could write down a list of all the things that we hate and wish didn't exist, and behaviors that we wish didn't exist. God had the same thing, and He wrote it down in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19. If you've never read the book of Proverbs, I encourage you to read it. There's an old saying, Proverbs a day keeps the devil away. And some of you are nodding your head, but you've heard that a few times, I'm sure. But Proverbs is a great book. It's a book of wisdoms. In fact, the first 7 chapters of Proverbs, if you're someone who is young or in your 20s, it's dedicated to those who are young. The first 7 chapters of Proverbs, if you're young, man, it's something that you should read on a daily basis because that information is from you. And we see in chapter 16, or chapter 6, verse 16, it says this: there are 6 things the Lord hates. No, 7 things he detests. So there are 6 things the Lord hates. And then the writer just pauses for a minute. And he's like, no, there's 7 things that he detests. Verse 17, haughty eyes. And so you're like, maybe not understand what haughty eyes means. Just within you, within how you see things and how you process things, is with the thought that first you matter most in all those situations. That what you think and feel is more important than what those around you think and feel. And then he continues, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent. Verse 18, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong. Verse 19, a false witness who pours out lies. And then we have the 7th thing that the writer, after pausing, wrote down, a person who sows discord in a family. How many of you thought blank needs to hear this verse whenever I read that? How many were like just processing that whenever it said those who sow discord within the family were like, oh man, you know who needs to be here? And then the person's name came out of your mind, not necessarily your mouth. Hopefully you're not murmuring under your breath the name of your spouse or someone who is sitting next to you. But how many of you have that thought? And we tend to do that whenever we read God's word, or we go to and we're hearing a pastor give a message. We tend to have the thought of, man, this would be perfect for somebody else. But here's the thing, the number one thing, whenever this writer wrote down what God was speaking and breathing through his life, the number one thing that God wanted to address and the behavior that he hated, number one was pride. And pride's a tricky one. And pride's a tricky one because you're kind of supposed to have pride, right? Pride is what makes you dress up and look nice. Pride is what makes you get ready in the morning. Pride is what makes you do a good job. Pride is what makes you make sure that you're wearing presentable clothes on Sunday and all the things that you go through on a daily basis. Pride is one of those things that will be a part of your life in a positive way. But then there is another type of pride, and it's a pride that God hates and that God detests. And there's a lot of reasons. And here's one of the things I want you to think about just for a second. How many people, there's a question up here, how many people have ever confessed to you that they struggle with pride and they need your help? How many times in your life has someone come up to you and said, man, I really struggle with pride. I'm a prideful person, and I need you to come into my life and critique it and direct me in a way that would get rid of your pride. And my guess is, it's probably 0 to maybe 1 or 2 in your whole life that you ever had someone come and say, man, would you come address my pride? But pride is something that everybody struggles with and that everybody has. And the other part of pride that's crazy is no one thinks that it's them. Whenever you go into a room, you're sitting in a room and says, hey man, we're going to be talking about dealing with pride today. Your initial thought process is like, yeah, pride is a problem in this world, but it never seems to be us. It always seems to be somebody else. And one of the things that pride can do, pride can just really change the trajectory of your life, and pride can really make things go in ways and cause things to happen that you have never thought would happen before. One of the things that I love in life is cars and trucks and fast cars and old trucks. And there's a story about Enzo Ferrari and Ferruccio Lamborghini. Now, those are 2 Italian cars that if I said, hey, you can have one of these cars, you're going to be pretty excited about it. And you would choose one or the other. One of you, you're going to love the Lamborghini or you're going to love the Ferrari more. And one day, Ferruccio came up to Enzo, and Ferruccio had bought one of Enzo's vehicles, a Ferrari. He made tractors, and he was a farmer, and he was a mechanical genius in a lot of ways. He went up to Enzo and he said, hey, I don't like the clutch on the Ferrari, and I feel like there's a much better way to do it, and hey, let me give you some ideas about your clutch. And he looked at Ferruccio and he said, you're just a tractor maker and a farmer. What do you know about cars? And so you know what Ferruccio did? He left and he started and built the first supercar ever to be built in the world. And now Ferrari has a lifetime competitor in Ferruccio Lamborghini. And that tends to be what can happen in our lives in a moment of pride. We begin something and start something that can affect us for the rest of our lives, and not just Enzo Ferrari's lives, but his children's lives, his grandchildren's lives, for the rest of Ferrari family's existence. They are going to have to deal with a competitor named Ferruccio Lamborghini. Hopefully you found that story as cool as I did, because I was really excited about it. You ever do something and then immediately think, where did that come from? Just a moment where you do something, a behavior, you say something, you treat someone in a certain way, and then you have this moment, where did that come from? I didn't see that coming, that isn't me. And then you always have the apology, hey, I don't know where that come from, that's not like me. And then you have people come to the defense, man, that's not like that person. They've never done that before, never seen that do it from them. Where did that come from? Have you ever, in your own life, have you ever as a customer, made an employee hate their job? You ever honk your horn for anything other than avoiding a wreck? How many of you have used your actual horn for making someone aware that they're about to get in a wreck? How many times in your life have you actually used the horn for what it was supposed to be designed for, and not just because someone was inconveniencing you at a stoplight or a stop sign? And I don't know what it is, but America doesn't know how to use a roundabout. I don't get it. It's a real problem. You ever keep arguing even after knowing you're wrong? You ever start an argument or get an argument, and then there's just this moment where you realize, man, I'm wrong. But then the moment that you realize you're wrong just makes you just buckle down even more and argue even harder on your behalf. Ever do the opposite of what your parents asked you to do? Have you ever been asked to do something by your parents, and then just in the next second, you just do the exact opposite of what your parents just to your face asked you to do? Or maybe it's a boss, or maybe it's a spouse. And whoever it might be, where does that come from? At the end of the day, church, it's because we believe the inconvenience we're being caused isn't worthy of who we are. The inconvenience in that moment and the difficulty in that moment isn't worthy of who we are. That we are more important than the inconvenience, that we are more important than the desires of another person, and isn't in that moment appreciating how special I am. C.S. Lewis said it really well. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. Read it one more time. I love C.S. Lewis. He has a way with words, as we know. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. And so why does God hate pride? Because pride stands in the way of everything that God is trying to accomplish. The first sin in the world was pride. The second sin in the world was pride. In fact, pride can be connected to nearly every sin that we commit or see committed in this world. And here's the hard part, church, is pride is a master of disguise. A lot of us might be sitting here this morning, or even like me, might be just thinking, am I a prideful person? And I would probably be like, no, I'm not a prideful person. But then we have to realize that pride can disguise itself. And here's 7 disguises of pride in Christians. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because one of them could be you. One of them could be me, or maybe 4, maybe 5. Number 1, finding fault. Criticism because you always know better. And you're just a person that's always criticizing those around you, criticizing everything that everybody else does, that you know a better way, that you could have done it better, that you could have done it easier, that your way would have been so much easier, and if they would just do it the way I would do it, it would be better. And that could be pride in disguise, church. A harsh spirit, just treating people like they don't matter. Treating people like you are always worth more than they are, and just really kind of concentrating on how someone isn't as good as what you would be, or just kind of a harsh thing about everything that they do, and critiquing everything that someone else does. Number 3, being superficial, whenever what people think is more important than who you are. Say it one more time. When what people think about you is more important than who you are. Number 4, defensiveness. No one can ever disagree or correct you. Nothing reveals pride faster than correction. Nothing reveals pride faster than rejection. There hasn't been very many people that can honestly stand up in front of everybody and say, whenever my boss or my spouse comes to me and corrects me, then in my spirit, I just feel all this happiness and joy boiling out of me and coming out into the world. Whenever someone corrects you, man, that pride will suddenly pop up. And so if you're someone that's always defensive, man, that could be pride. Number 5, attention seeking. All situations have to be about you. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how little it involves you. And my kids were very close in age, and so there was a period in time that we had to buy 2 birthday presents whenever one of our kids had a birthday. Because we would rather have a birthday present ready for them than for our friends and family to see a meltdown as one kid gets a bike and the other does not. It's terrible parenting. Neglecting others. Stepping over those who can't help you. Stepping over those that can't do anything for you. Stepping over those that can't help you get to where you're going. Stepping over those who can't help you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And so if you're constantly neglecting people that are, you would consider under you, then there's some pride issues there. Number 7, not accepting help. I'm the one that helps people. People don't help me. And this is probably the biggest one that I struggle with because I'm a doer. I'm a person that give me a to-do list and I will conquer it and I will defeat that to-do list like no one else because I may not be the most talented person in the room, but no one is going to outwork me. And so whenever someone says, hey, can I help you? Man, the pride kind of starts getting in the way. One time, me and Jill, we were remodeling our house, and I kind of got stuck. I kind of bit off more than I could chew in the kitchen, and so we had a contractor in the church that was a board member. I said, hey, can you come over and help me mount these countertops on these cabinets in the kitchen? And so he was a big, huge help, and we sold the home and after we were done, and God blessed us and blessed what we had done, and we had more money in the bank than what we thought was possible, so we wanted to take them out to dinner to say thank you. And so whenever the check came after dinner, they grabbed the check and they paid for it. And kind of like that awkward moment of like, hey man, you're not going to pay for our meal, we're going to pay for yours. You're the youth pastor, I'm the board member, we pay for your meal. I remember they came up to us on Sunday and they apologized. And this moment kind of changed how I viewed things from then on out. He said, Aaron, I want to apologize. I sinned against you. And I kind of like prepared myself. I was like, whoa, like what? He said, I sinned against you. You wanted to bless us, and I stole that blessing. I took that blessing from you. God had directed you to do something, and I stole that from you. And so since that moment, anytime someone has offered me a gift, I no longer, hey, I don't need your gift. Hey, keep your money, keep your food, whatever it is. And I accept it because one of the things that pride will be revealed in is not accepting gifts, not accepting help, and not accepting people trying to help you get in the direction that you're going, because it will reveal a moment where just in your mind and your heart, you feel that you're above whatever it is that they are trying to offer. Is everybody still with me? Yeah. Here we go. Here's the point of it all. Almost every sin we commit can be traced back to pride. Every time we hurt someone, it's usually because of pride. Every time we sin against God, and every time you have hurt someone, sometimes just a little bit of hurt, and sometimes deep hurt. And every time I have hurt somebody, it's usually because there is pride in my life, and I am using that pride to function in this life and how I treat and approach people and approach myself. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 5, it says this again: the Lord detests the proud, they will surely be punished. In Proverbs 16:18, it says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. I think that the Bible is pretty clear about how God feels about pride. Because here's the scary part about pride, church, since it's the leftover scary edition. The scary part about pride in Christians is it is disguised as righteousness. And one of the reasons why you hear people say, man, there's no one meaner than a Christian, or there's no one meaner than a Pentecostal, is because whenever we begin to do wrong, if we believe that we are right with God, then we behave in a manner that our behavior is suddenly righteousness, and we have a righteousness about our behavior. And of course we're not doing anything wrong because I'm God's man or woman of faith and any power, and how could I ever be doing anything wrong? And so obviously, you are the one in the wrong in this situation. And that's the scary part, church, is that pride for many years, even decades, can be hidden by this idea that it is righteousness. Am I alone this morning? In Luke chapter 18, Jesus is speaking, and he tells a parable, and this parable was inspired in a moment. And it says in verse 9, then Jesus told his story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness. And so it was a group of people that believed that their own righteousness, that they stood there, and they believed that just who they were was better than anybody else around them. They were holier than anybody around them. And it says, and they scorned everyone else. In verse 10, 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. And so you have to imagine that a Pharisee is going to be a hero of a day. The most respected person in that time, the most respected person in that society is going to be a Pharisee. And so one was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. They believed that tax collectors were beyond redemption, that literally their sin permanently separated them from God, and they were literally the lowest form of life around them. And so you have two people on the opposite ends of the spectrum. A person who is the most respected in society and the person who is most hated in society. In verse 11, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. And listen carefully. I want you to notice the highlights here. I thank you, God, that I am not like other people. Cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I'm certainly not like the tax collector, the guy standing right there. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income. And we'll bless this holy man. His whole prayer was about himself, and none of it was about God. There was not a moment where he recognized God. The whole prayer was recognizing himself. And it was something that was very popular in that time, that people who felt they were holy would go in the middle of the temple and they would pray these loud, boisterous prayers about how holy they were and how they were God's favorite. And then verse 13, Jesus speaks again. And he says, but the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. And so instead of standing in the middle with his arms out and his head held high, speaking of how great he was, he stands in the corner and he can't even lift his eyes up. He looks at the floor and he prayed. He said, instead he beat his chest in sorrow. So this is a man mourning who he is and the position that he's in. And he is a person who has great wealth. There are probably very few people in society that were wealthier than a tax collector. And so he's a man from the outside who appears to have everything, but on the inside he is empty and broken. And Jesus says he is beating his chest in sorrow, saying, oh God. So the first person that he speaks about is God, not himself. Be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. The only recognition of himself was that he was so far from where God wanted him to be. In verse 14, Jesus says, I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Church, pride is so dangerous because it separates us from the God who we proclaim made us more righteous and better than the ones around us. Our self-righteousness is but filthy rags before God. And in that moment who Jesus is speaking about with the Pharisee, this is a person who knew better, knew all the things of God, all the ways of God, and spent the first 30 years of his life doing nothing but learning and memorizing Scripture. A Pharisee is someone who could quote every single word that is written in the Old Testament. And here he is, so far from God, but the man who is full of sin was much closer because he recognized that without God, I am nothing. It doesn't matter what I have achieved on the outside and all the wealth and prosperity and how I'm not going to have to worry. My children won't have to worry. My grandchildren won't have to worry because of my wealth. But on the inside, I am lost and so full of sin. God, I need you. 3 things pride Three things about pride that should scare us, church. So if you're writing it down, give me just a second. Three things about pride that should scare us. The biggest difference between scheduled surgery and emergency surgery is the pain and length of recovery. Church, if we don't come to God and say, God, there's pride in my life, would you please remove it? And in that moment, God could go in like a surgeon and carefully cut out what is going on before there is an illness, before there is an emergency, before things are beginning to fall apart. And though it will be painful, the recovery will be short. But if we wait until it's an emergency and our pride has got us into the middle of a mess and destroyed relationships or destroyed our position in life or destroyed our relationship with God, then it becomes an emergency surgery. And if you know anything about surgeries, emergency surgery is a big deal. If you have a gallbladder, you go in and have it taken out, you go home that same day, but wait till it's an emergency. You're going to be in the hospital for at least 3 days. There's all kinds of risk, there's all kinds of waiting, and there's all kinds of pain, and the recovery is long. And so, church, if we keep pride in us, then just know that in the future we have an emergency surgery waiting for us. Number 2, pride builds a wall around us that keeps God from us. Pride builds a wall around us that keeps God from us. And so whenever we have these, hey, this is who I am, and this is why I'm better, I do all things right, and I make all the right decisions, and I've done this in life, and I have this in life, and I can point over here, and I can point over there. And next thing you know, all of our prideful accomplishments have built a wall around us that God can no longer communicate through or function through our lives because of. And so there's going to be us suddenly separated from God, no longer able to go the same direction as He. When God can't work through us, everything we do in our own power, our own works, in our own authority. When God can't work through us, everything we do in our own power, in our own works, in our own authority. Suddenly, whenever we're trying to accomplish things, whether it be spiritually or in the church, or at work, or at home with relationships, all that is going to be dependent upon what we can do within ourselves, and no longer do we have access to Jesus who has all the names. No longer do we have access to the Creator who is around us. Is everybody still with me? You're never sure how a sermon about pride is going to go. So here we are. Church, the cure for pride is remembering what God has done. The cure for our pride in our lives. And hopefully we can all have this moment where we all admit that we have prideful moments. Like I've said, very few of us use the horn for its intended use. Or how we treat wait staff, or how we treat people in retail, or how we treat people on the road, or how we treat co-workers or employees under us. All those are things that reveal pride in our life, and the best way to cure pride is remembering what God has done. In the Old Testament, whenever we see that Moses has passed on, and now it is Joshua taking God's people into the promised land, and they walk up to the river, and then God told Joshua, don't cross into the river, first take the ark into the river. And so as they approach the river with the ark, the water parts, and it parts this wide part, and the waters just hold. The Bible says that the shores began to expand as the water was held back by God. And it says that the people crossed, and this is millions of people, crossed the Jordan on dry land. And after they all crossed over, then it says that Jacob built 3 altars with 12 stones. And he says, we are building these altars. And he says in verse 21 of chapter 4, then Joshua said to the Israelites, in the future your children are asked, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them, this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. And so it is a moment of remembrance, and this is something that Moses did, it's something that Jacob did, and it's something that Joshua did, that they would build these altars made of stone, that so whenever someone would pass, they would say, what is that altar for? And in that moment, that person could tell the story of the goodness and provision and the blessings of God. One of the things that tends to happen whenever you begin to remember and talk about what happened in yesteryear, All of a sudden, all these like little memories come up. If you talk about whenever your kids are little, then suddenly you start remembering when they did this and they did that. And it's the same thing with God this morning, church. If we will begin to talk about the things of God around the people around us, then we're going to have an opportunity to remember what God has done in our lives. The other day, Angel, he came to the church on Monday night, and he did some work here at the church. And Angel's done that a couple times now. I just appreciate you, Angel, for what you've been doing, and hopefully you don't mind me talking about you here in front of the entire church. But after he was done working, we went out, we grabbed a cup of coffee, and we just began to talk. And one of the things that came up was Ray Comfort. Does anybody know who Ray Comfort is? Jamie, would you mind coming up and playing just here? Sorry. Ray Comfort is a street evangelist. And if you've ever watched him, Ray Comfort has a way of reaching people in ways that I haven't ever been able to do. But Ray Comfort had this book. It was in my office. It's called Hell's Best Kept Secret. And this book is mostly about how in the church there's this movement where we're trying to soften sin and make some sin not sin. And so Ray just talks about how we have to continue to approach God. And so one of the things that Ray Comfort will do is he'll come up to you and he'll say, "Hey, I'm Ray Comfort. Nice to meet you." And the person can even say, "Hey, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God." And he'll say, "That's fine. Let me ask you some questions." And he'll say, "Have you ever told a lie? Even a little one, not necessarily a big lie, but a little lie." "Well, yeah. Yeah, I've told a little lie." And then he'll say, "Well, have you ever told a big lie?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, I've told big lies too." Then he'll say, "You're a man. Have you ever lusted after a woman who wasn't your wife?" Well, he's a guy. He can't say no. Jesus said the same thing. You can't. Don't stand here saying that you can't say no. He said yes, and so it's okay. He's like, "Have you ever hated someone? Have you ever just held so much anger and got so angry at someone that you hated them?" "Oh, yeah." And then Ray will say, "So what you're telling me is that you're a lying, adulterous murderer." And then he'll say, "Have you ever stolen anything?" And almost every kid in this world has stolen something. And about half the adults have stolen something. And he'll say, "Yeah, well, I've stolen something." He says, "So you're telling me that you're a lying, adulterous, murderous thief. So tell me, do you think a lying, adulterous, murderous thief gets to go to heaven?" And so he went from like, "I'm an atheist and none of this matters to me," to all of a sudden having this moment of realizing that, man, if there is a heaven, then surely I'm not the one that gets to go. And then Ray will say, "But I have good news. Guess what? You can have forgiveness from all that. All those sins can be taken away from you." And then he'll tell him there isn't a sin that is bad enough to separate you from the love of God. There isn't a sin bad enough that will keep God from forgiving you. And you can see moments where you can just Google or go to YouTube, Ray Comfort, and just watch his process. It's incredible. But here's what we do, church, as Christians and believers. We come to church and we get the forgiveness and then we remember it for a little while. Like whenever I got up from the altar and then my life was changed in a moment. In a moment, I went from just this lost drug addict Aaron and then stood up a new creation, and it was an amazing moment. And I remember just sitting down and just feeling the waves of God's presence, and the Holy Spirit almost just passed through me like it was washing me. It was incredible. And it's easy to remember that, but then all of a sudden, I began to serve in church and then start to get titles. I'm an intern. I'm a youth leader. And then I'm the junior high pastor, and then youth pastor, and then associate pastor, and then I got the big title of executive pastor. That sounds pretty fancy, right? And then God calls us to Las Cruces, and then I get the title of lead pastor. I'm the lead pastor. I lead them all. And it's so easy in that moment to just look back and to stand above my kingdom and just go, "Look what I have done." Aaron, you're awesome. You're the best. And I forget the Aaron that crawled to the altar with nothing to offer but sin and brokenness. And so what is the point of today? Pastor Aaron, you've been speaking for 30 minutes. What's your point? The point is don't forget where you stood before salvation. Don't forget that you were once the one that was wretched and lost and broken. That once you were the one that was far from God. That once you were the one that didn't know the truth. That once you were the one that wasn't aware of the scriptures of God. That once you were the one that wasn't aware of the Spirit of God. And how could we ever in our lives find a moment where we feel like we stand above those who do? Church, there's a weight in your backpack, and it is pride. Then just know that is always going to be the thing that burns you out. That is always going to be the thing where you have this moment like today where you begin to think about and process and like, wait, God, you're so good. God, I forgot that I built an altar to remember you here, that you've done so much in my life. And then through that, you begin to treat the world around you with discontent and contempt because you believe that you are in a better place than they are. And whenever we do that, church, we are cutting ourselves off from the flow of God's presence. God is clear that whenever it comes to pride, it's number one on the list. Hey, God, what are things that you hate? Number one, pride. And so if pride is something that is in your pack today that you have been carrying around and trying to haul, and just know, that is all of us. We all have pride to deal with, but if we stop dealing with it and begin to let it grow and let it hide in the shadows of the things that we carry around in this world, then we are going to continue to be subject to the pride, and God won't be able to speak to us in a way that He desires and that He wants. And then suddenly we go from thinking that we're the one on the good side, and we become the Pharisee, and suddenly we're the ones that Jesus is speaking to and at, rather than the ones who are standing next to a Savior who did such great and marvelous things.